A couple years ago, I found a bug on my strawberry and it looked like the type of bug that could grow into a butterfly. So I placed it in a new little home and waited. But 4 weeks later, I couldn't find the green bug anywhere. I thought maybe it transformed, maybe it escaped. So I looked around the container and I saw what looked to be like a bunch of worms. And I immediately started to question why there were so many little worms if I only placed one caterpillar inside. And I started to see that these things even began to shed their skin. And it hit me that this skin they were shedding was not caterpillar skin. And then I remembered the time I tried to hatch mealworms in this container. I know, it sounds confusing, but at that time, I initially got some mealworms to feed my Venus flytrap plant, and then I began to wonder, what would happen if I fed these things and let them grow to their maximum potential? Would they grow? What would they turn into? And if you can't already imagine what they turn into, I'll give you a little hint. It's a really big bug with a lot of legs. And mealworms are invasive. You can't release them outside. And I knew I couldn't keep so many mealworms at home. And I remembered one time in university, my friend told me that her dad farms mealworms to feed them to her lizard Lenny so he doesn't have to keep buying them from the store. And I thought they would be perfect for Lenny. So she agreed and came to pick them up. And that's when it hit me that when I emptied out the container, I guess I didn't wash it with soap. And that's where the bug on my strawberry comes into play. Because when I put it into this container, that's when I found the worms instead of a butterfly, and it all made sense to me. And I was like, oh no. I really thought I washed it out well, but there must have been leftover eggs inside the container that ended up hatching right when I put the green bug inside. And I was stumped because I really wanted butterflies, but now I just had a bunch of worm pests. So it was in that moment that I came up with a plan. I immediately took one of my mealworms and fed it to my Venus flytrap plant. Almost had an escape artist out of that left-hand corner. And then I ran to the pet store and got these. More mealworms, but smaller ones this time, like really small, to add to the container so that I could see what would happen if I let them grow and transform. The other ones I tried hatching were a lot bigger and I felt like I missed stages of transformation. So I opened up the bag where 20 tiny mealworms lived, had to get used to handling these tiny little creepy monsters, moved them into a more comfortable home with some oats and some apple pieces to live until something crazy happened. I sat and watched them crawl around for a while. This one was going insane. And then I put them in their new corner in my home, and I had no idea how slow or how fast this process was gonna be, but finally that first night passed, and soon, before I knew it, a couple weeks passed and the worms were changing. I saw one bug that I initially thought was dead, but I soon realized that this bug had already transformed into the next stage of its life. And then I realized that this was gonna be good. And I was soon gonna learn the inevitability of what happens when you do in fact make the odd choice of putting mealworms in a bug box to transform to their next stage of life. And to my surprise, I noticed that these things started to grow and wiggle. It almost looked like they were doing backflips. So I got the time lapse rolling, and when I played it back, I saw something insane. Remember when I told you one of the worms I thought was dead actually had already transformed into the next stage of its life? Well, I began to see in real time how that actually took place. Somehow, the little worm went from brown, beige, and long to white, pearly, and slightly smaller and a more wrinkled version of that worm. And I realized that just as a caterpillar morphs its body into a chrysalis so they can emerge as a butterfly, similarly to the mealworm, they go from being the little worm to transitioning into the adult form. And that means their bodies begin to break down and reorganize internally, and the wormy tissues gradually dissolve and grow adult structures. Somehow, by the gift of nature, the wormies do some backflips, the larval skin splits open, and the pupa emerges, which can take anywhere from a few hours to more than a day of hard wormy work. And then something else happens. And as the days passed, I played back the time lapse, and I had honestly never seen anything like this before. The newly emerged white cream-colored pupa are soft and they lack a hard exoskeleton, so they appear less defined, and it's during this stage where in nature they're pretty vulnerable to predators eating them because their exoskeleton hasn't hardened yet. But after a couple days pass, the pupa finally hardens more and gets ready for the next stage of metamorphosis, the actual hatching. and boy was I excited to see what was gonna happen next. And as excited as I was, I also started to wonder, what would happen if you were to eat these things? I mean, I wouldn't ever eat them myself, and I normally wouldn't do this at all, but my friend who's a doctor somehow convinced me that she would eat them for purposes of scientific research, and since some of them were still pretty small, I invited her over. Together, we sacrificed 3 mealworms, put them in the freezer for 4 hours, and once the time passed, we removed them, boiled them for 5 minutes until they looked like this, and then we fried them for another 5 minutes. And finally, once they looked like this, we popped them in the oven for another 10 minutes, and then they were finally ready to eat.
In a couple weeks, you'll let me know the blood test results.
If I get E. coli, you'll be the first person that I call.
After a much anticipated wait, the meal was ready.
Dinner is served.
I brought them over to the dinner table, and Anna and Dr. Bunstein were ready.
We're actually eating time.
I didn't know if she was really gonna do it or not, but she actually took the first 2 mealworms like a champ.
Delicious. Tastes like chicken.
And then the third one.
Even though you've done it once, it kind of doesn't make it better. It almost makes it worse.
No comment.
And I was so grossed out, but just along for the learning ride here. You know, science. But we got a thumbs up.
You're lying.
They're like pretty good. Water chaser would be outstanding.
And I got her some much needed water.
Chugging the whole thing.
Crunchy.
There's a toilet if you need to puke.
And I guess that's the moment I found out what would happen if you eat mealworms.
Well, that's a wrap then.
And as soon as she left, I got back to the other 17 mealworms that we were letting transform, and another week passed. A majority of those worms had already transformed into these soft little white things that continued to turn their bodies back and forth. There was a lot of skin that the worms had shed, and I was worried that if I took them out of the container, then I would transfer eggs into my home, and I didn't want to risk getting these things loose in my house. We already dealt with leftover eggs in this container, and I wasn't gonna risk it further. So I just left it as it was and continued to watch, and I started to notice that over the next few days, the white exoskeleton of these little tiny things were beginning to change to a darker color. They looked like they were going from soft to hard. It almost looked like some sort of bug, but my query was in fact confirmed, because the next morning I woke up to a literal bug in the enclosure crawling around, and I was very confused. So I rolled the time lapse back to reveal something absolutely spectacularly, grossly insane. This little bug split open the pupa case and emerged as a soft and pliable adult version of this creature. It crawled around a lot until I noticed that after about 5 hours, the bug changed color from creamy pinkish to darker reddish, and I realized that as the exoskeleton begins to fully harden, the color of the bug changes too, which was insane to me. And once the bug reaches the final dark color, it begins to crawl around looking for food and, I guess, a mate, so they can inevitably continue the life cycle. Soon, before I knew it, all of these little things started transforming into bugs, and it was in this moment that I realized that I may have a problem, because these things are gonna either eat each other or mate with each other. I guess there's no in between, and I was oddly excited to see what was gonna happen next after all the bugs transformed. Was that gonna be their final stage of metamorphosis? Thankfully, these don't fly or climb, but I noticed some of them get stuck on their back, and it would take them a while to flip over, which made them pretty vulnerable. And then the other bugs started to find their way over to the bugs stuck and climbed on top of them and started mating. And over the next 5 or 10 days, I started to find most of the bugs on top of each other, having a real nice mating party that I wanted nothing and everything to do with. And of course, I assumed that they would be hungry after. So I gave them some much deserved apples to munch on, and I watched them chow down. And around this time, my friend sent me a video of her lizard Lenny eating her farmed mealworms, which was really exciting. Lenny was a happy, goofy guy. So, as more of these things begin to hatch, it looks like we're gonna successfully be able to continue the life cycle and get these ladies pregnant. And now I realize that I really need a pet store chaperone, because my last trip to the pet store for dog treats accidentally turned into me leaving with these hornworm pupa.
Raph, I know you're excited about the bunny.